Today on the podcast, we're having a conversation about innovation. My very special guest is Frans Johansson, best-selling author of The Medici Effect, one of my favorite and most recommended books. This book is an innovation classic. Released by the Harvard Business School Press, it explores why the most powerful innovation happens at intersections, where ideas and concepts from diverse industries, cultures, and disciplines collide. Available in 21 languages, The Medici Effect has become the definitive book on diversity driving innovation, influencing fields and disciplines such as architecture, design, economic development, education, entrepreneurship, and investing. Frans told me that diversity is a key driver of innovation success. And so today, I give him a call to talk all about it.
Hello?
Hi.
We'll do it live. Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff.
Joining me on the phone is Frans Johansson, best-selling author and founder and CEO of the Medici Group. Frans's ideas around leadership and innovation and diversity have inspired audiences worldwide, while his practical insights have empowered thousands of people to take action. The Medici Group is a solutions firm that helps companies accelerate their innovation and growth by leveraging the power of diversity. They break down silos and they leverage diverse talent, enabling organizations to move faster, unleash growth, and transform their culture. Over the past 14 years, the Medici Group has worked with over 4,000 global teams from 40% of the Fortune 100 companies, and I am so excited to have him on the phone. Frans, welcome to Phone Calls with Clever People.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be part of it.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. I'll tell you why. You know how, I'm not sure whether you have any of these for you personally, but you know when you read a book and you think to yourself, I just really wish I had written this book because I would love to have claimed this as my own. That for me was your book a number of years ago, The Medici Effect. And that's the kind of book that I have. Do you have any of those books for you?
Yeah, actually, when in fact, I'd say the book that inspired me to even try to write The Medici Effect was The Tipping Point. I read The Tipping Point, and I remember when I was done with it, by Malcolm Gladwell. When I was done with it, I find myself both excited because I thought it was a great book, but also annoyed. I'm like, what? I've been thinking about these things for a very long time. I've been thinking about these concepts. And it was just it was excellent how those concepts came together into that book. But it also made me wonder, yeah, I've been thinking about those concepts, but that's really a sideshow compared to what I've been really working on and thinking about for a long time, which really had to do about this notion of intersections, which is growing in my mind. And I think that all came basically further encouraged me to go and say, you know what, maybe I can actually write a book on something like this. I think it was part of that puzzle.
Well, if you can imagine that frustration and channel that frustration, that's how I was feeling when I was reading your book, because I was going, I wish this is the book that I was able to write for the world, because I found it so helpful and so valuable. And so ever since then, I've always thought to myself, if I have the opportunity to have a conversation with you to talk a little bit more about it, I would really value that. And so appreciate you taking the time and jumping on the podcast. I want to kick off with 3 fast facts, which is what we do in every one of the kind of episodes that we do, give people a chance to get to know you a little bit. And so it's 3 quick questions, which is, where were you born? What was your very first job? And then what do you do now?
So I was born in Sweden, in Gothenburg, the second largest city of Sweden. And so interestingly, I would say that my first job that I got paid real money for, which is going to sound absurd, it was in high school, and it was writing a book. It was writing a book, a Dungeons and Dragons book, or the Swedish version of Dungeons and Dragons. I sent in a proposal, and they said, look, this is interesting. So if you write it, we might buy it. And I spent 2 summers writing this book. That was it was a significant risk because, it wasn't like I was making any other money. I couldn't go and do things that other kids were doing. I basically, I had to not generate any income in those 2 summers, but I did manage to sell it.
So you're an author long before you were an author.
I was an author long before I was an author. Without it out, yeah, I sold my first book in high school. Yeah, so I would consider that my first job.
And then what do you do now? I mean, you kind of in some ways still doing what you were doing in your first job and writing, but there's a lot more to it, I'm sure.
I mean, yeah, I don't spend enough time writing, as much time as I would want writing, but certainly that will come back. I will eventually come back and write my third sort of book in this way. But what I do now is I'm the so besides being a thought leader and a speaker and so on about the concepts that I write about, I've started a company called Medici Group, and we've been a consulting firm for many years, and recently we launched a platform that helps organizations to drive change very, very quickly. And we're honing in on change that are linked to diversity, inclusion, and innovation.
I love that because it really does bring to life some of the concepts from the book that you wrote and the book that I'm referencing here. And I'm hoping that when people are listening, what they'll be able to do is they'll be able to jump into the show notes, click on the link and get a copy of the book. And if they haven't already read it, to read it. I mean, but for people who are listening to it now, can you kind of give us a bit of an idea of like, what's the big idea behind the Medici Effect? When you wrote that book, what's it kind of all about, and what has that kind of propelled for you?
Yeah, so that book basically says that we have the best chance of breaking new ground at the intersection of different disciplines, cultures, industries, and so on. And it's when we have the ability to recombine concepts from these different perspectives, different backgrounds, different fields, that we actually innovate. It goes to the heart of this notion that diversity drives innovation. Mm. And this is true whether you talk about fields. One of my favorite examples from the book, I open with it, is an architect that draws inspiration from termite ecology. They realize that termites build mounds of the African savanna and keep an exact sort of 30 degrees Celsius inside of these mounds. And by sort of imitating aspects of that design, he's able to build a building in Zimbabwe, in Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe. Uses no air conditioning, and he uses sort of the same principle for cooling that building. So I'm like, here you're really combining two different, very, very different worlds to innovate, to create something new. But it's also true across cultures. It's true for people from different backgrounds. And this is, that sort of is the heart of the book. Now, it has other implications. Once you start going down that road, you start to realize other pieces. For instance, that success around these ideas tend to be far more serendipitous or unexpected than you could really count on. It ultimately led to me to write a whole second book just about the unexpected nature of innovation. But because people always ask, well, which of these combinations is the most powerful? And it's hard to tell up front. You kind of need to go in, explore, test ideas that come out of these intersections.
I think one of the things that, come to mind for me when I read the book and I look at the world around us right now is I don't know that you'd find too many places that would argue with the idea that they want more innovation. I think everyone would be saying, well, yeah, of course we want more innovation. And even still, I don't think you would find many places that would argue and say, we don't need more diversity. We would say, yeah, of course we want more diversity. We want more innovation. But I mean, what are the problems that you're seeing as you look at the world around us at the moment?
So let's unpack that for a second, because if you look at history long term, the arrow of history is very clear. If you go back 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years, the world has become increasingly diverse and inclusive. So we're able to bring together people from today. We're able to far more effectively than at any other time in history bring together people from all over the world. And in order to do that, we're also able to successfully do so. We're able to bring people together that are different, but also can also work together and build on each other's ideas and so on. So I would say that long term, this seems to be an absolutely unstoppable force that drives the notion of diversity and inclusion. But in the short term, every era goes through sort of can halt or go backwards in this move. We might be in one right now. you will find people in almost every all across the world that will every country that will be hesitant about the notion of diversity. It's better to focus on ourselves, who we are, and so on. And then when it comes to interactions between disciplines, again, we are finding ourselves in a world where we are encouraged to be hanging out with and be inspired by people who are more similar to us, that are similar interests to us, rather than interests that are different. So there are multiple forces right now that are in subtle or obvious ways preventing us from reaching out to difference, inviting difference.
Oh, I like see the language there of inviting difference. I think is a really important part to kind of hone in on. I'm not sure if what it's like because you're based in New York, I'm in Melbourne. When things were opening up, when shops were open, we saw a few things start to arise in the last couple of years. One of those was there was a store here in Melbourne, the Kit Kat store, the chocolate bar store, and they were huge on creating personalized chocolate bars. And so you could go in there and basically create your own Kit Kat and create your own chocolate and candy. There were other stores. There's a huge fashion company here called the Daily Edited, and they're creating personalized fashion items because it seems to me like the last few years, everyone wants something that feels personalized to them, customized to them. You go on social media, we have a curated feed of followers, we have an algorithm that puts things that we like and enjoy in front of us. What do you think that's doing to creativity and diversity and intersections?
Yeah, it's sort of it's unexpected almost, because if you think about the promise of internet, of social media, it is really to connect with more and different people around the world. That's this notion that was brought forth. But the reality is that almost every player in the space have an incentive to actually try to create bubbles around you that's become more and more focused on what you like, not just the posts that you click or the media that you consume, but the people that you're following and so on. It just is trying to just more and more predict it. And the only thing they can really use is to use your past to try to figure out what to predict and what it is that you're liking. And then it wants to even further predict into the future. So it actually encourages you, right, to be a bit more predictable, a bit more focused, a bit more, yeah, this is what I like. And actually, now that I know that, I want to just present you with more and more stuff like this, because if I can get you to click, if I can get you to engage, then that's going to lead to a financial outcome for whichever company is involved in this journey. So it's almost like that piece of this promise is not being followed through. Doesn't mean you can't do something about it. I keep on getting these questions a lot. Like, well, how do you ensure that you are exposed to diversity? How do you ensure that you are exposed to difference? And those are conscious effort, things that you can dig into to actually do. There's all kinds of tips we can get into on that if you want to. But let me also just make the point that it goes beyond just social media, because artificial intelligence is really based on understanding existing data sets and then through that try to extrapolate into the future. And if we take hiring, so increasingly recruiting is aided by AI. But what happens when companies try to identify the employee most likely to succeed at their company? What they're really doing is they are looking at past employees that have succeeded and say, like, who are they and how can we get more of those? And this past, right, is not only are they replicating the past itself was biased. Like, not every person got an opportunity to be part of the success of the company at that time. So not only are these algorithms trying to replicate the past, they're replicating a past that was biased. So to your question, we are in what I think about it is that this is one of those forces that, if we're not careful, could really accelerate division. Actually, it's already accelerating division between us, and it is happening not because of somebody you can point at and go, that person is trying to divide us. It's happening by every individual choice that we make every day.
It's this these echo chambers that we create with ourselves. Because I thought about it, this idea, like imagine logging on, or people who are listening, logging on to a social media platform, and every post you're seeing is something that is completely unrelated to you. So maybe you're an artist and you're seeing things around science, and maybe you're a scientist and you're seeing poetry, and you would sit there and you go, this is not personal to me. I didn't want to see these things. I don't want to follow those accounts. And yet the nature of that is actually creating these, feeds, or these, similarities, and we're losing that ability to be able to kind of think outside of our own domain.
That is exactly right. And in fact, the ability to think outside of your domain is one where you have to be open to be, a bit uncomfortable. Now you can train yourself to do it, but it could be difficult when what is presented to you is exactly the story that you feel you want to read right now. And where are we heading with this, by the way? I mean, if you extrapolate this further, you start to realize that stories that you're reading, many times are just made up stories. I mean, we see this politically for sure. But there's made up stories. There's made up stories about COVID. But as long as they are pleasing to you, then you will engage with it. So the extrapolation of it is that really where we're heading towards is a world where, ideally, if the AI can create a bubble of one, just you, where it's creating and feeding you stories that really you love and want to read, and you're really only talking to yourself and interacting with yourself. I mean, that's sort of the dream. That's sort of the logical extension of where it is that we're heading. And you can just imagine how killing that would be of innovation. So part of what we do, part of what I do, is focused on helping teams and people introduce unexpected differences in a meaningful way, in a way that say, wow, this is exactly what I needed. Even though I wasn't aware of it originally, even though I'm an architect, term and ecology is not something that I would be investing time to understand. What you're helping me do is see the connection. So there are architectural implications to what the termites are doing. And that's the bridge in which enables me to go and seek diversity. And it ultimately comes down to this notion that as long as you can find something that connects to what it is that you're doing, even just one thing, that bridge into this other world or culture or industry or discipline, now you have the roadmap to actually enjoy and explore diversity. Because as you said, if you just present it with random stuff and you don't know what to do with it, that's not going to go over well. But if you're able to make that connection, all of a sudden it goes from being irrelevant to intriguing.
I often think about it like having a glass of water and not realizing how thirsty you were until you start drinking. And I feel like what you said before, it's like when we introduce this into groups, it's like they didn't realize they needed this until all of a sudden there's this explosion of creativity, and they went, I didn't think, because I was so enclosed in my world and so focused on what I knew. Somebody comes and teaches us something brand new, and it's like this, it's this thing that they didn't even realize they needed in their team.
The way that is expressed is through surprise. This is a wonderful emotion, right? Which is that, whoa, and we love creating that experience for people all over the world. It's, you're something is happening. You didn't expect it to happen because it didn't play out the way you had planned it. But if everything that you did was planned, it means that you're not really doing much of anything innovative, because it means that you're predicting the future. Innovation is about actually creating the unpredictable. It's about doing something different, something unexpected. So yeah, that emotion of making an unexpected connection, making that unexpected connection count is just huge. And it can inspire people frankly, it can be enough to spark an idea that you could stick with you for decades.
Yeah, so true. the in the Medici Effect, you talk about this, and I'd love to maybe just touch on it briefly, which is this idea of associative barriers. Because one of the things that we're on this conversation around AI is, like you mentioned, it's like it's taking information and data sets from the past, using it to create some sense of predictability for the future. And then some organizations would say, well, it feels like we're moving forward with, you know, our eyes focused on the rear view mirror, and we're not creating new, and we're not looking forward. And again, probably there's an element of these associative barriers that are being created through some of this AI and personalization conversation. Do you want to touch just briefly on, for people who haven't read the book, what associative barriers are all about?
Sure. So, why is it that we struggle sometimes to connect different fields or cultures? It really comes to the shortcuts that our mind makes as we try to develop new ideas. So, if I'm an architect, for instance, and I think of something like a building, I may connect that to concrete, or I may connect that to steel beams. Or if I think about something like air conditioning, well, I will be thinking about things like a air conditioning unit, the actual vents that will go through a building, and so on. So that's the architect. And then you have a terminologist, for instance. And the terminologist, if you're asking what they're thinking about when they think about termites, well, they may not be thinking about insects and the African plains where they live and the wood that they're eating and so on. So you basically have people that are the associative barriers is the barriers that we have that prevents us from associating what we're working on or what we are interested in with something that is kind of outside of the obvious connections that you could make. But it turns out, right, that they're actually termites and architecture actually connects. And so people that have low associative barriers, they have the ability to dare to make those connections. Oh, you're doing terminology? Wow. You know, it's interesting because when you're talking about how they are cooling their mounds, it makes me think about air conditioning in buildings. Now, that's somebody that has lowered their associative barriers because they're making a connection between air conditioning and termites. So these barriers are actually absolutely critical to our ability to make connections, to connect difference. And what the algorithms are doing are helping create these barriers for us. But they're saying, hey, you don't have to do the hard work. When you're thinking fishing, we already know roughly the world of fishing that you should tap into. Fishing magazines, there's fishing rods, there's fishing locations, fishing vacation. It's the whole world of fishing that would sort of be the obvious choices that you would make. What we really need are algorithms that actually help you connect fishing with something completely unrelated and help you see the connections so that it sort of encourages you to explore it.
One of the conversations I have with people, you know, if I look at as a Gallup strengths coach, my number one theme is ideation. And I love that about me. I never had a language for it for a long time. And the only way I would describe it to people is I would say, you know, when you say blue, most people just would say sky. And my response is like, well, sunflower. And people are like, I don't get how you got there. Yeah. And it was like, because my brain went, well, yeah, blue made me think of the sky, which made me think of the sun, which made me think of the garden where I grew up. And in our garden where I grew up, there were these beautiful sunflowers. And so naturally my brain went there. But for people who don't think like that, it's very much like, well, blue means sky. And so they find it hard to join the dots. And one of my biggest challenges for most of my creativity and most of my career was helping people walk out the journey of how do we connect some of these dots together. Do you find that people struggle at times to bring down some of those associative barriers? What gets in the way? What keeps them up? Like, what's challenging for people?
Well, so as I said, our mind, they create these barriers because actually they help us as well, right? So if we constantly are deciding to go and do a Wikipedia search for every single concept that we're encountering, that's going to be taxing. So there's a rationale for it. It's designed to help us stay on point, focused, and so on. So there's a benefit. It's not like it's zero benefit from having associative barriers. But what's interesting is that the more that innovation is needed in the world, which is the world we live in, every month that goes by is in some way increasing the innovation rate, right? We're living at the slowest time that we will ever live again right now. It's just keep on going faster and faster and faster. We need the ability to actually make these type of connections because we need to innovate. Now, how do you, so when you ask what the challenges are, the challenges are often built in. So we have to find ways to encourage us to seek out this difference. And there's two ways to do it effectively. One is that you are engineering it into your life. Who are you hanging out with? What does your circle of friends look like, or colleagues? Is it a diverse group, or all everybody roughly the same? Then you can also hack this effect as well. And you hack it by purposefully introducing difference into what it is that you're working on. This is something that we call it explore intersections. And what that means is that when you're looking at a problem, when you're looking at an opportunity, when you think about an asset that you have or a relationship, you intersect that with something that seems widely different. In fact, for a long time, we would have these intersection cards that would have just names of things on them, right? So if what you're doing is you're creating bottles of water, what happens if you intersect that with something that is completely seemingly unrelated, like a Formula One car? Okay, if you're like, well, okay, I need to make a connection between these, and maybe you're not able to. But if you are, it is likely to be very different. And we've run this over and over again, right? We worked with a water company at one point, and we gave them the opportunity to connect, water with a water hose, with a water pump. And it said, well, so if you connect a water faucet with a water hose, like what type of innovative ideas would you come up with? And it's very difficult because, like, yeah, it's like, wait, I connect, like, you can't help yourself. He's like, I will connect the water hose to the faucet. You just find yourself saying those words and you're stuck. And it's like, well, this idea has been done before. But what happens if I tell you I'm going to connect a water faucet, with a frequent flyer miles? Okay, now I actually have to start working and trying to come up with an idea around this. Well, and what that is, you far more likely to come up with something unexpected if you do it that way. And that's kind of hacking this experience that you otherwise can create by looking at the people that surround you, or looking at the inputs that you're getting, or the books that you're reading, or the articles, or the links that you're clicking on.
I was talking to someone recently about this idea that, creativity in many ways is around connecting the dots for things and drawing these new patterns in new ways. And what I'm hearing this in many ways, kind of the ability to create those connections is based on our ability to collect more of those dots, right? So have more of those dots that we can draw. And so when you're hacking these intersections, are you throwing more and different kinds of data sets into the kind of creative conversation? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are products and services and TV shows and that out there in the world today has come out of exactly this process, right? So because we've been working with teams to do it. So if a team is trying to figure out how to accelerate the ability to pursue intersectional ideas, they can rely on the diversity of the team itself, but by actually purposefully intersecting what they're doing with something else, you're setting it up for success. I'll give you an example. So this is another favorite example of mine. We have a hospital. They have a problem where they transfer patients from a surgical unit to an intensive care unit. You have two teams working on this patient, but these teams are not always collaborating. They're not always coordinated. And so that means that occasionally there are flaws that introduce errors. And sometimes these errors can be fatal. And this is a real hospital. It's a hospital in Cambridge in the UK. Now, how would you solve this? Now, the obvious thing to do would be to reach out to other hospitals. How have you solved this? What are best practices? Let's try to talk to those that understand this problem the deepest. But this hospital did not do that. They teamed up with a pit stop crew of a Formula One car racing team, McLaren, in fact. And try to understand, how do you think about collaboration? How do you think about coordination? Are there things that we can learn from you that we can apply in what it is that we do? Not that it's a one-to-one correlation. Trust me, a Formula One pit stop crew team is still very different from a hospital crew team, but it completely changed how they thought about what they did. And when they did that, they started dropping the error rate. They started collaborating better. This is what I'm talking about. You can purposefully. So now imagine, right, that anybody who's listening to this, as you're looking to solve something, imagine that for a moment, you're saying, I'm going to draw inspiration from a pit stop crew. Like, how would that change your thinking pattern? How would that change how it is that you're approaching it? And then you can start doing it with all kinds of things. The more unlikely, sometimes the better. As long as you're willing to throw out the ideas that don't resonate, you can't really lose.
I mean, that's such a good example of like something that seemingly two pieces which seemingly don't connect, and yet there's elements within them which are so helpful and valuable. It's like getting out of that, detail and into the contextual and understanding some of there's commonalities and similarities between some of these things.
Yeah, and just to take another idea that emanated from your country in Australia, Ahida Sinetti, traditional Muslim woman, moves to Australia, and she realizes that the dress code for a traditional Muslim woman does not really align with the dress code for a typical Australian beach culture. But she asked herself, why couldn't it? Why can't she combine a burqa with a bikini? And why can't she create the burkini, which is a burqa out of sort of high performance material and cut, and turns that into a global sensation. Nike launched its entire pro hijab line a couple of years ago. And here's the thing about this story, right? It is that, again, if you would have asked focus group traditional Muslim women and said, hey, look, what's the potential of selling bikinis within your group? It's zero probability. Okay, got it, thank you. And then you would have turned to, Western swimwear manufacturers and asked the same question. They would also have said zero. What was actually required was the ability to be inclusive of both of these perspectives, of stepping into the intersection of both of these worlds. If you're able to do that and can see the connection, then you can innovate. So it cuts across fields, it cuts across cultures. This is why diversity is so powerful in driving innovation.
I think, if we were to, like, for a moment, assume that the people who are listening to this say, yeah, I love this. Like, I would absolutely agree. The key to our innovation in our business is that ability to explore intersections, to be able to value diversity. And I think, like, if we were to say that they're bought in on that, and then we say, okay, so what now? Like we've got an organization, we want to be more innovative. We're trying to create more diversity and explore some of these intersections in our business. Friends, can you come in and just make our organization more innovative? Can you just do that for us? Like, what's actually required for us to make this actually happen?
So we launched a platform not too long ago in August that enables us to help organizations do this at scale. And it stems from a completely really revolutionary way of looking at change management. So here's the thing. What you're describing requires change, a change in behavior, one way or another. Okay? But so to me, the point wasn't so much that we have to convince people that this is the right thing to do. Diversity, bringing in difference, then driving innovation, testing, failing fast, all of this stuff. I think one can get people there. The challenge is, how do you get them to do it? So that's where that was the second order innovation that we created in my company. We really needed to come up with a new way of driving change management. And I believe that if you take all of change management, everything that's sort of said and done in it, you can sort of boil down that change within a team happens or within a leader happens in the following way. This is sort of the most basic heuristic of change. That is that a person will do more of what they've seen work and less of what they've seen not work. Like, remove everything, remove all the complexity from it, and you land at that point. Okay, so let's take that as a given for a second. What does that instruct us to do? What does that tell us about how we have to create change? What it means is that we have to create a situation where a person or a team is able to try a new behavior and then very, very quickly see the positive outcome of that behavior. Not like next year, but next week or 2 weeks from now. And if they can make that link, then they will repeat this new behavior. So if I say that, look, if you're able to invite somebody that is a bit, increase the diversity of your team by inviting somebody else to it, and then you can actually experience the positive impact of that on the team, then you're likely to do it again. And soon this becomes a habit. So that's really what Renaissance, which is what our platform is called. This is really what that is doing. It enables teams to learn a new, what we call a move, an action, a behavior, and then test this move within the team quickly on something that matters to them, see the positive impact that occurs when they do that, and then repeat it. That's sort of the setup of it. And that's what is needed. I believe that I've traveled the world keynoting, speaking about this stuff, and it's great. It inspires people, but so much is still left for the organization to pick up on and say, well, okay, I love this, but how do we do it now? And that's what that is meant to accomplish. You're finding a way of how to actually do it in a way that scales. That becomes very important.
So if you were listening to this and you were leading a team, what I'm hearing in that is that in order to kind of create like a more of a culture where, innovation and diversity, these things are really central and integral to our team, we've got to provide experiences where we actually give people freedom to explore those intersections and play with those ideas, and then see the product and maybe call it the surprise, maybe call it the actual implementation of the idea, but some kind of success as a result
That's
of
right.
that quickly.
And that's the thing that I think has been most challenging, right? Because what you have to do is you have to break down this sort of experience into very specific units. We call them the atoms of innovation. And they're all tied into this notion of inviting diversity and being inclusive. So I'll give you an example. We have a move called Share Sooner. It simply means that you're sharing an idea or concept sooner than you're comfortable with. It's a very, very simple move if you think about it, but it's actually very hard to execute on. Because the reason we don't share something sooner is because we don't want to look foolish. We want to be buttoned up. We want to have the PowerPoint and the backup slides. But if you're able to get to a place where you can share something sooner, you can get input earlier, which is going to make your idea better. You don't have to actually accept input, but getting it is not bad. And it enables you to actually once a team and organization gets used to this, it enables you to do it more with people that are different from sort of the usual suspects that the team has. So even if the outcome is just a small innovation, I'm not talking about creating, a Tesla. I'm talking about just, let's say it's a small process improvement. We had one team, I saw this come through, I think it was last week. They did something a little bit differently, and instead of taking 48 hours to accomplish this particular task, it now took 24. So 24-hour savings doesn't seem like much, but for them it was 50% improvement, massive. But it was just using a move and through that understanding a different way of solving for things. That's what's required. The ability to go in and actually test new actions, new moves, and see how they work. And you should be able to see it within a week or a month. If it takes 6 months, then you should redefine where you're testing the move. Right? You're like, well, we're going to see an output of this, next year. If I hear that, I'm like, well, 12 months from now, I would suggest that you use this move in a different context so you can see the positive outcome of it earlier. Because otherwise, you're not really going to adjust your behavior.
What I think's really helpful in that is we often think about innovation as being something brand new, something that is, we've created something that I can touch and I can feel. But an example of that is actually just being able to do something better or do something faster or quicker.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the hospital and Formula One example I shared earlier in this conversation is a direct example of that. It's a process innovation. I think one of the greatest disservices that's occurred to people in general over the past decades is that innovation has become synonymous with like an iPhone. Say like the iPhone was innovative. Well, some Android users will argue that it isn't. Okay, but the Android, whatever. It's like But this is what innovation is. It's this sort of real innovative products, hardcore, deep tech. And sure, I mean it's innovative, but innovation. The amazing thing about it is that it can come in so many different ways. It can come as a product, as a service, as a process, as an approach, as a marketing campaign, as a sales tactic. The key is that you are creating a new way of doing something, a new type of, or a new product. But that's what it comes down to. You can even actually, if you want to be so broad, you can say that if you're driving a particular way to work every day, and you then say, you know what, I'm going to try a different way of getting to work and see how that goes. And that new approach actually works. You took a risk. It could have failed. Not, the risk of failing wasn't great, but this still matches the definition of innovation. It makes it very participatory. And what's crazy about this is that some of the more interesting innovations, they can come about in ways that we don't expect. Like it's not big or planned, or it doesn't feel big or planned. Yeah, going to the moon, going to Mars, okay, that's big and planned. So that covers that bucket. But many breakthrough innovations happened in small ways. Microsoft Windows, which really took over the whole world, was really something that was planned to be shut down. And it was really a surprise meeting that happened one night between two engineers, where they started discussing how to solve a particular bug in the Windows operating system that ultimately solved it. If that conversation hadn't happened, it's likely that Windows would have been ceased, and instead we would have been on OS2, which probably wouldn't have worked because it sucked. So, it was you can't even know in the moment if a small innovation can become big. We worked with a entertainment company. They came up with an idea that seemed very, very basic. Virtual runs, you run at home. This is before COVID, so it's ahead of its time. And everybody said, that doesn't make any sense. You need to go to a marathon. You're going to run a marathon together with other people. But it turns out, so they tested this. It was a blast off success, instant success. And it just had big implications for how this company thought about that type of activity. And when COVID hit, it was a savior for it. Small ideas can turn out to be actually big ones later on. So anyway, yeah, that's how I'm thinking about it.
I'm reflecting on this conversation. I think there's some really big ideas that I'm taking away from this. And obviously we started exploring this conversation around intersections and the power that diversity brings to innovation. But what I really took away from that is that it takes a lot of work and effort to seek that out, because naturally, if we were to just kind of go about our day to day, our world is kind of conditioning us to take the easy route and to not really have to work for that diversity. Is that kind of a theme that I'm hearing in our conversation?
I think that is one theme. It is doing that, but it's also, look, it is doing that. But if you can get yourself into a mind space of being open to the difference, then there's tons of resources. Look, once we're done with this podcast, this is going to be a resource that people can use. And we created this, on a Monday afternoon. Well, here in New York anyway. guess it's your morning or something. But
Yeah.
so all this true that that we're feeling this pressure to become and reach out and interact with people and content that's more along the lines of what we like. We have choice. I mean, we have options. There's just an incredible amount of stuff out there. So as long as you're aware and fighting that, you have your ability to innovate is mind-boggling. I mean, it just blows my mind. If you have an idea and you want to go ahead and pursue it, it could be an artistic idea, it could be a technological idea, it could be a scientific one. The ability for you to go out and test this idea is greater than it's ever been. I mean, just ever. Forget it. Let's say you can get no fundraising. You still have options. That did not exist in the past. So to some degree, there might be a bifurcation of people that are able to sort of resist this siren call. It's kind of pulling us into a world of just the known, of planned stuff, of a world where serendipity has been engineered out. We can resist it. We can go and pursue all those things.
It's been such a helpful conversation, friends. Like really, in so many different ways. I feel as a naturally kind of curious and creative person, I would sit here and talk to you all day about this conversation. But what I've loved about what you've brought to this is there's some really practical elements into what we've talked about. So if you're a leader that's listening to this, if you're a team member that's listening to this, just doing simple things like what could we throw into the mix here in terms of intersections that might help us to be able to connect the dots between things that seemingly don't connect, or what could we be doing to try and create some quick wins quickly where we can actually see the impact of our innovation and the results of our innovation quickly, so we want to do more of that. I mean, as people listen through, there'll be lots of really practical things. Is anything else that you would leave? I mean, if someone's listening to this now and going, I feel so inspired, which is obviously naturally what you do, you inspire people around this, like, but I want to do something right now. Like, what's the most accessible next step for a person to start doing something with this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends a bit on where they are in their journey. You know, if they're looking to create a new, interesting idea, then I would just say go intersection hunting. Ask yourself, we have a move called Unusual Suspects. Ask yourself, drop a list of who you usually hang out with, who you go to explore an idea. Write down those names, and then don't go to those people. Just at least once. Try to find somebody else. By definition, you're introducing some diversity into your network that way. Or if you're uncomfortable doing that, find inspiration from other fields, other industries, other cultures. Read up on, explore online. Ask yourself, how would I borrow concepts or approaches from this field into what it is I'm trying to do? So that's what I would say there. If you're already working on something, if you have an idea going, if you're exploring it, then I would turn to this other piece, which we haven't talked much about today, but it's this notion of, we call it the smallest executable step, but it's this thing that instead of trying to solve all the things that's wrong or right with the idea up front, get going. What can you execute this week? Anybody's listening to this, it's Monday here in New York. What can you execute this week on this idea? What can you get done? What can you test about this idea? That's really what I would say for those that are in that phase of it. They have something, but oftentimes we're prevented from pursuing it for a whole host of reasons. The pathway forward is chop it up, make it smaller, execute that piece, see how that works, learn from it. If it works, keep on doing that, keep on going in that direction. If it doesn't, well, ask yourself, should I revisit what I've done? Is there something I can learn here? So those are some pieces that I would share.
So helpful. Thank you, Frans, for A, taking some time to be on the podcast, and B, just sharing so much helpful, wisdom around this idea of innovation and diversity, which is obviously what you're well known for around the world. And if people, you've talked a little bit about the Renaissance kind of platform. Like, if people wanted to connect more and learn, to either invite you into their organization to have conversations with some of that executive level conversations. I know you do that in the Medici Group. What's the best way for people to connect with you and to learn more about some of your work?
Yeah, they can link in with me directly or our organization. I mean, if it's with me, it might not be me that responds every time, but it's going to depend on. But it happens all the time. People go and say, "Look, I want to pursue these ideas," so then I can put them in touch with the right person inside of Medici to help explore that. Or alternatively, they can go to our website, themedicigroup.com, THEMEDICI group.com.
That'd be great. And I'll put the links into all the information that people typically might have in terms of how to connect with you and the best ways that they can reach out, and just to follow along with your work. And of course, there's a whole range of things that you do, and you really are adding a really valuable voice into the conversation around innovation around the world. And so really appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. This was great. Enjoyed it.
That's it for another week of phone calls with clever people. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in you by checking out the podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the episodes as they're released. And of course, I'd love to hear how this has added value for you in the reviews. Have a fantastic week.